Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Taraba Governor-elect vows to fulfill all campaign promises within his first 100 days in office. Large asteroid to safely zoom between Earth and the Moon later today. At least 23 people died as violent storms ripped through the U.S. state of Mississippi. My name is Tunde Ido. We begin in Nigeria. The Taraba State Governor-elect, Lieutenant Colonel Agbu Kefas, retired, says he will keep all the promises he made during the electioneering, noting that the era of promise and fail is over. While stating that his victory at the polls was part of the deal he struck with the people, he said that the people have reposed in him their future and hopes, and he would not take it lightly. Mr. Kefas made the promise in a statement by his spokesperson, Emmanuel Bello, obtained by journalists in Abuja. He stated that the mandate given to him is a serious matter, promising to fulfill all his campaign promises and accomplish them in his first 100 days in office. In Africa, at least 34 migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, including children and babies, are missing off the Tunisian coast after their boat capsized. It is the fifth migrant boat to sink in 2 days, with 7 people confirmed dead so far and 67 still missing. Authorities believe the boat was heading for Italy. In the meantime, Paul Ruse Abagina, a former hotel manager portrayed as a hero in the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda, has been released from prison in Kigali. 2 years ago, he was sentenced to 25 years for terrorism by a Rwandan court in what supporters called a sham trial. A government spokesperson said Mr. Ruse Abagina's sentence had been commuted by presidential order. Mr. Ruse Abagina is credited with saving some 1,200 people during the 1994 genocide. U.S. President Joe Biden called the news of his release a happy outcome. It has taken years of diplomatic pressure and talks brokered by Qatar for Mr. Ruse Abagina to be released. And to some news outside Africa, a large asteroid will safely zoom between Earth and the Moon today, a once-in-a-decade event that will be used as a training exercise for planetary defense efforts. According to the European Space Agency, the asteroid named 2023 DZ2 is estimated to be 40 to 70 meters wide, roughly the size of a Parthenon, and big enough to wipe out a city if it hits the planet. The head of the ESA Planetary Defense Office, Richard Mossel, said the asteroid will, about 1949 GMT this evening, come within a third of the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Mr. Mossel, in an interview, noted that though the asteroid will come very close, there is nothing to worry about. The asteroid will pass 109,000 miles from Earth at a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. And in Europe, the new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland has been formally adopted by the United Kingdom and the European Union. We enter power sharing. Earlier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiators said the framework allowed the UK and the EU to begin a new chapter in relations. Marcos Sefcovic was in London yesterday to ratify the new post-Brexit deal with UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. Mr. Sefcovic said the EU will continue listening to everyone in Northern Ireland and continue its commitment to the peace process.
Windsor framework, something which protected the European Union's single market, protected the UK's internal market, but most importantly, perhaps, protected the elements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We've now found a way to move forward. We've found a way to unlock the full potential of what is a very strong strong and important partnership between the UK and the EU. To that end, today we'll be discussing several important issues, including our commitment to protect each other's citizens, and later on today we will look forward to discussing how we can maximise trade opportunities as we discuss things in the TCA.
The spring is a season for new beginnings, and therefore I'm truly happy to be in London today, because the EU-UK Joint Committee will adopt necessary decisions relating to the Windsor Framework. The Partnership Council will give a positive signal to our cooperation for the future, and I totally agree with you that this is a major achievement, because we are bringing our partnership to the level it deserves, and to be honest, it's needed in today's world. And this partnership based on trust, driven by cooperation and delivering benefits for the people on both sides is very important. And I would say that given our historic bond, our shared values and our challenges that are global in nature, this simply makes.
And elsewhere in Europe, French authorities have arrested 457 people during a nationwide protest against French President Emmanuel Macron's pensions reform, as unions call for more demonstrations. Hundreds of thousands of people across the country have taken part in protests against President Macron's plan to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. Here's a report detailing events that unfolded since the demonstration began on the 19th of January 2023.
A series of general strikes and demonstrations hit France on the 19th of January 2023, organized by people opposed to the 2023 French pension reform bill proposed by the 43rd government of the French Fifth Republic, headed by Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne. The pension reform bill seeks to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64 years. Unlike Nigeria, where citizens were happy that President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law a bill to increase the retirement age of teachers from 60 to 65 years and extend their period of service from 35 to 40 years, French workers are livid that the government would raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 years. The strikes led to widespread disruption, including garbage piling up in the streets and public transport cancellations. There have been significant police presence at the demonstration that sometimes ended with clashes with protesters, the use of tear gas, and some arrests. But these are so far not deterred the French President Emmanuel Macron, who has refused to budge on his government upping the retirement age to 64 years. The cost of pensions has partially contributed to France's national debt rising to 112% of its GDP, compared to 98% before the COVID-19 pandemic, and is one of the highest levels in the European Union. Macron had said that when he began working, there were 10 million French pensioners, and now there are 17 million. So for France to keep the system financially viable without funneling more taxpayer money into it, Macron sought to gradually raise the legal age when workers can start collecting a pension by 3 months every year until it reaches 64 years in 2030. He had also accelerated a previous change that increased the number of years that workers must pay into the system to get a full pension, and abolished special pension rules that benefited workers in sectors like energy and transportation. Macron had tried so hard to convince French workers of the need for these decisions.
As I speak to you right now, do you think I enjoy doing this reform? No. Do you think I could have done the same as many others before me and sweep this under the carpet? Yes. Maybe. But there is one thing I regret. It's that we weren't able to inform of the need to undergo this reform. So yes, there aren't 100 solutions if we want the pension system to be balanced. It no longer is. And the more we wait, the more it will get worse. And so this reform is necessary. I would have preferred not to, but it's also because of a sense of responsibility.
As the moves did not go down well with trade unions, left-wing political parties had also taken advantage of the situation. The fracas had lingered and taken a new turn in March this year, when the government used Article 49 of the Constitution to force the bill through the French Parliament, sparking more protests and 2 failed no-confidence votes, which contributed to an increase in violence in protest alongside the union-organized strike action. General Secretary of the Steel Industry Federation, Stéphane Destoux, said all that French workers demand is a fair pension reform which takes into account all workers' pensions paid and the toil of their jobs. According to him, there's a lot of hard work in the steel industry and factories, making it difficult to work until 64 years. Other workers across different sectors also aired their views on the reform.
We lived through COVID. They messed us around with the lockdowns and by shutting down universities. My generation has been living with the pressure of climate change. Since I was a kid, I've thought that in 2050 the earth would be on fire. I don't have any time to lose. Now as a nation we're all thinking ahead to when we'll be retired, but my generation doesn't even know what kind of living conditions we'll have by then. Just when it comes to air quality.
A poll by the Opinion Way survey group showed that 61% of French people supported the protest movement. In January alone, the Ministry of Interior counted 1.12 million demonstrators, including 80,000 in Paris. As at March 23rd, about 320 protests have been planned across the country, with the biggest demonstrations in the southern towns of Marseille, Nice, and Toulon. Meanwhile, France has one of the lowest retirement ages for an industrialized country and spends more than most countries on pensions, amounting to almost 14% of economic output. Daniel Odeyemi, Western Spring Television.
And moving to the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine's commander-in-chief says the battle for Bakhmut, the Ukrainian city which Russia has spent months trying to capture, is stabilizing. Valery Zaluzhny said Ukrainian troops' tremendous efforts were holding back Russia. Earlier this month, Western officials estimated between 20,000 and 30,000 Russian troops have been killed or injured in Bakhmut since last summer. Moscow is eager for a victory after failing to make major recent gains. Meanwhile, Air Force commanders from Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark have said they have signed a letter of intent to create a unified Nordic air defense aimed at countering the rising threat from Russia. The intention is to be able to operate jointly based on already known ways of operating under NATO, according to statements by the 4 countries' armed forces yesterday. According to the commander of the Danish Air Force, Major General Jan Dam, the move to integrate the air forces was triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February last year. General Dam further stated that their combined fleet can be compared to a large European country. The signing at the Ramstein Air Base in Germany last week was attended by NATO Air Command Chief General James Hecker, who also oversees the U.S. Air Force in the region. In the meantime, United States President Joe Biden has said China has not yet sent weapons to Russia to replenish stockpiles that have been exhausted due to Moscow's war in Ukraine. President Biden made this known in a news conference during a visit to Canada, stating that China is yet to provide weapons to Moscow, but didn't rule it out. He noted that he doesn't take China lightly, as well as Russia, suggesting that reports of rapprochement between Moscow and Beijing had probably been exaggerated. Speaking about the U.S. relations with Canada, President Biden stated that the two countries are both strong economically to bring back manufacturing to North America.
After we're both out of office, both China out of the game in terms of many of the product they're producing, and the United States and Canada pretty solid economically situated for the future in terms of also bringing back manufacturing jobs. Sorry. And they're telling me I'm talking too long because we got to go to dinner.
Thank you. On va prendre maintenant dernière question.
We'll take one last question.
You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break. Please stay with us.
Zedong at birth, but globally known as Mao Zedong, he was a Chinese revolutionary and founder, People's Republic of China, which he led as chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from 1949 until his death in 1976. He was a communist who believed in the attainment of power by the instrumentality of gun. His wise saying, "Political power grows out of the barrel of gun," formed the major plank of his revolutionary struggle for the control of China. In the long span of his leadership and political power, Mao Zedong relentlessly entrenched the communist philosophy in China, which emphasized the revolutionary struggle of the vast majority of people against the exploiting class and their state structures. The communist leaders defined the class struggle as people's war. Mao Zedong was a story of grass to grace, having risen from peasantry to preeminent status as China's most respected leader. Western Spring Television identifies Mao Zedong as a major character in history.
Thank you for staying with us. In the United States, at least 23 people have died as violent storms and at least one tornado ripped through the U.S. state of Mississippi, tearing off roofs and flattening neighborhoods. The Southern States Emergency Management Agency said at least 4 people were missing and dozens were injured, while tens of thousands of people in Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee were without power. Governor Tate Reeves, in a post on Twitter, confirmed the death toll, noting that search and rescue teams are still active. Also confirming the death toll, the Emergency Management Agency cautioned that the numbers are expected to change. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will hold an election rally in Texas later today at a site that critics say will play to his far-right supporters as he seeks to boost a presidential campaign dogged by the threat of criminal indictments. In what the former president has billed as his first major rally of the 2024 presidential race, Mr. Trump called on supporters to assemble at an airport in Waco, Texas, and cheer on his bid for the Republican Party nomination. Waco is marking the 30th anniversary of a raid by federal agents on the Branch Davidians religious sect that resulted in 86 deaths, including 4 law enforcement officers. Some far-right extremists view the raid as a seminal moment of government oversight. In an email, a Trump campaign spokesperson said Waco was chosen because it is situated between several major population centers and has the infrastructure to host a large event. Mr. Trump is due to start speaking at 5 p.m. local time. And in South America, Brazil's former far-right president Jair Bolsonaro will return to the country by the end of the month, ending a prolonged stay in the United States. Mr. Bolsonaro's Liberal partner in a social media post yesterday revealing that Mr. Bolsonaro will fly back to the capital of Brasilia on March 30th. If he does return, he will end his over 3-month stay in the U.S. following his election loss to Curran Silva, who was inaugurated in January. Mr. Bolsonaro is under investigation for his alleged role in stoking the violence and has stayed in the U.S. despite hinting at his return to Brazil on several occasions. In Asia, Indian opposition leader Rahul Gandhi says his disqualification from parliament was due to him asking Prime Minister Narendra Modi tough questions about his relationship with the founder of the Adani conglomerate, Gautam Adani. Modi's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party responded saying Gandhi had been punished under the law for a defamatory comment he made in 2019 and it had nothing to do with the Adani issue. Mr. Gandhi, a former president of India's main opposition Congress party, who is still its main leader, lost his parliamentary seat. Court in the western state of Gujarat convicted him in a defamation case and sentenced him to 2 years in jail. Mr. Gandhi, in his first public comment since the conviction and disqualification, said he was disqualified because the Prime Minister is scared of my next speech. Mr. Gandhi, once dominant Congress, controlled less than 10% of the elected seats in Parliament and has been decimated by the BJP in the last 2 successive general elections. In the Middle East, pro-Iranian forces in Syria have said they have a long arm to respond to further United States airstrikes on their positions after tit-for-tat missiles and drone attacks in Syria over the last 24 hours. The online statement released late yesterday and signed by the Iranian Advisory Committee in Syria said U.S. airstrikes had left several of their fighters dead and wounded without specifying the fighters' nationality. In the statement, group noted that it had the capability to respond if any of its centers and forces in Syria are targeted. On Friday night, 2 Syrian opposition activist groups reported a new wave of U.S. air attacks on eastern Syria, which hit positions of Iran-backed militias after rockets were fired at bases in Syria housing U.S. troops. In other news, Silicon Valley pioneer and philanthropist Gordon Moore has died aged 94 in Hawaii. Mr. Moore started working on semiconductors in the 1950s and co-founded the Intel Corporation. He famously predicted that computer processing powers will double every year, later revised to every 2 years, an insight known as Moore's Law. That law became the bedrock for the computer processor industry and influenced the PC revolution. And talking sport, a Brazilian court has ruled that Brazil's triple Formula One champion Nelson Piquet to pay $953,050 in moral damages for racist and homophobic comments against Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton. In an interview in November of 2021, Piquet used a racial slur referring to the 7-time world champion when commenting on Hamilton's British Grand Prix crash with Max Verstappen. Hamilton called for action to change archaic mindset after footage of the interview surfaced on social media last June. Piquet, 70, apologized to Hamilton and said his comments have been mistranslated. Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. The Taraba State Governor-elect, Lieutenant Colonel Agbu Kefas, retired, says he will keep all the promises made during the electioneering, noting that the era of promise and fail is over. A large asteroid will safely zoom between Earth and the Moon today, a once-in-a-decade event that will be used as a training exercise for planetary defense efforts. At least 23 people have died as violent storms and at least one tornado ripped through the U.S. state of Mississippi, tearing up roofs and flattening neighborhoods. You can follow us on all our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I am Tunde Ido. Good evening.